Welcome to the People Strategy Podcast. I'm Tracy Austin, your host. In this show, we dive into the latest trends and best practices in talent management and organizational development. Join me as I chat with industry experts, HR leaders, and business innovators to uncover strategies that can elevate your people and your business. Of course, there's so much gratitude to give, and there's two former guests that I want to thank today. One is Sherry Simpson. So Sherry joined us on a podcast back in June of 23 that we labeled the seasons of life and really looked at seasons of life and the impacts within that and how we can support folks through the seasons of life while still hitting business impacts. And the second is Michelle Caracco talking about second chances in the workplace. And both of these you will find dovetail very nicely into our conversation today with John Knowlton. John runs a group called C12 and coaches business leaders, and we will hear from one of his leaders next week. So, with that, John, welcome to the show.
Tracy, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and share with your guests, your
Yeah,
listeners, rather.
absolutely. So, you've had somewhat of an interesting path to where you are today. And I'm curious to know kind of what brought you to where you are today, coaching business leaders specifically on core values.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, the theme of my jobs, I guess, would be helping people. So I started my career as a United Methodist pastor, and there's a pretty clear commitment in that role to helping people with all kinds of things, relationships, their spiritual lives, all that. And then I was pushed into a career change and landed in wealth management, financial planning. And for some people, they asked, "Gosh, that's a really big hard shift, isn't it?" And I saw it as a continuation, just focusing on helping people with their financial lives. And then I've been a bivocational guy where I've been a part-time pastor as well as running businesses. At the end of 2020, we had hit my business goals, and we have two adopted kids in addition to two biological kids. And my wife kind of was waving a flag saying, "Hey, it's time to re-engage with the family and help with the kids some more." And so I took that opportunity to sell my interest in my business, took a sabbatical year. We became COVID RVers and went all over the country in a motorhome, and then stumbled across this thing called C12, which is peer advisory group for Christian CEOs.
That gap year you took. So you traveled the country, you did the RV thing, you did all those things. I'm curious of the impact that had on your ability to generate and create amazing results once you came back refreshed.
Well, I'll tell you what, it made me more curious. And so as we traveled the country, we were discovering things about our family, discovering things about the country. We were learning new things like how to be an RVer. Like we didn't know that before. I spent my first nights on the slopes of Mount Rainier, which is a 14,000-foot volcano in Washington state. And it just sparked this great curiosity. And as that's one of the really, that's the key tool in a coach's toolkit, being curious about the problem, being curious about the client, being curious about the range of solutions. So it refreshed me and stoked curiosity. So I have much less certainty about my answers, but great confidence in my questions.
I love that. So you found C12, and it sounds like through C12, you focused on really working with clients. And it sounds like a big part of that practice is on core values.
We certainly believe at C12 that having clarity around mission, vision, and values is really key to the results that you're going to get. The really mission, vision, and values are they're concepts, but then once we're clear on those concepts, then we can act it out. The behavior can follow. I've got a concept called the body follows the head. In other words, I ride bikes a lot, and I've noticed that if I turn my head to look behind me to the left, my bike goes to the left, and the same thing to the right. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what we get in our head is where it leads our path. And so the mission, vision, values are like the head
Hmm.
of the body of the organization.
Okay. I like that. What we get in the head, the body follows. Did I get that right?
Yeah, the body follows the head. Yeah,
Yeah.
that works.
Is that going to be in your book?
It is. That's one of the chapters of the book.
Amazing. So I'm curious. We're going to hear from one of your clients, Greg, next week, and some of the impacts on some of the core values that he's put into his business. But you talked a lot about clarity within the core values. What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, so values are a statement about what's important to us and how we're going to act. And so it's really it's really important to be clear about what are we expectations of the organization and what are we striving towards. So mission is why are we here? What is our
Hmm.
purpose? Vision is if we're successful at the mission, how will the world be different? And then the values are the way that we're going to show up in the world, the way that we're going to be together and amongst our colleagues and our peers and our customers. How are we going to act? And so getting clear about those things is a process that it often takes a while to do, but really makes it easier to hire the right people, to reposition or manage the wrong people out of the organization. The values can be used in job descriptions, they can be used in the annual review process. And they're just critical to how do we make decisions and run the organization.
Yeah. And I love something that you said, which is what are we moving towards? So often in our coaching practice and working with our clients in our leadership programs, it's really folks are running away from something
Yeah.
versus moving towards. And this question is, hey, what are you moving towards? Because if you're running away from something, guess what? You always take yourself with you. This
Oh
fun
yeah.
little fact. So you can have the same experience again. So what is that going towards? So I love that piece of it. And I just wanted to highlight that again for our listeners. And you talked a lot about core values built into your interview questions. We build them into our one-on-ones. We build them into our appreciation pieces. And we've got scorecards around those as well because those core values, that key behaviors that an individual has, do move us towards something or away from something. And I'm curious, how would you define culture?
The best, and maybe not intuitive, but the best definition of culture is what do you tolerate?
Okay. I love so our definition, as our listeners have heard many times, is we define culture as the behavior that you allow or do not allow inside of the organization. Essentially
There you
same
go.
thing, right? And again, it's like what you tolerate, but it's also what you appreciate, right? Because
Yeah,
the
sure.
things we appreciate will grow as well. And those core values give us kind of that North Star as to what to move towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about using values in your interview questions and kind of the maybe not a great way to do that would be we value trustworthiness. Give me an example of trustworthiness. But I like the kind of, I don't know, sneak attack questions
Yeah.
that where you're not actually identifying the value, but you're identifying the behaviors that would flow from that value and ask some experiential, behavioral based questions that that address your value without being explicit.
So appreciation is a key one for us. And one of the questions that I love to ask, and by the way, I got a version of this from the CEO of Titus Talent. So I always want to give credit where credit's due. And he's been on the podcast as well. But that appreciation piece. And so there's so many times where I will ask candidates, tell me about the best experience you've had at work or what was your biggest win at work. And then they tell you the story or what that is, and I say, "All right, so how did that happen?" Because I'm looking for 2 things. I'm looking for the appreciation core value, and I'm looking for the teamwork core value. And we
Mm,
never hit a result without a team. We just
yeah.
don't, right? And so after they tell me what that is, with teamwork, I'm really listening into what are they gonna tell me about how they got this result, and do they name people and what that is? And then once they name that, I say, "So, what was the follow-up? Did you do any follow-up with that afterwards?" Or something to that effect, or and I'm really listening to say, did they actually go back and appreciate those folks that supported them into getting to XYZ role or win or position? That kind of scenario-based interview question of or that this isn't scenario based, but like, hey, tell me about the biggest one you've had Why was it a win? Who was involved in a win? And was there any follow-up after that? Really allows me to see the teamwork and the appreciation piece.
I love that. And so what I mean by like a sneak attack question would be one that seems really straightforward. So if you ask someone to give an example of when they had to plan a project and then see it through, they're going to go step, 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 step. Well, first I scoped it out, then I did the plan, then I called the vendors, whatever. But you can be listening, just like you said there, Tracy. You can be listening for the stuff that they mentioned that they think the question is about project management. You're actually wondering if they're gracious or they're kind or
Yep.
they're team oriented, or if you're in a construction business, if they're considering safety or whatever the other values are. So you ask this question, but you're actually listening for these other things. Yeah, great
Absolutely.
example.
Absolutely. Let's say an employee has a flat tire. How does that pull into a core value, especially if they have a flat tire, they're late for work, they call you and say, "Hey, I had a flat tire. I'm going to be late today." Do we dock them those 2 points for being late? Or like what do we look at in that?
Well, that's a great way to point back to the core values, and we've also had this concept of hierarchical core values, and I got this idea from WD-40. I had a chance to have a meal with their former CEO who instituted hierarchical core values, and what that means is if two values come in conflict, how do we know which one wins? So just to use your flat tire example, maybe an organization has a value of we care about our people, and they have a core value of we get the job done.
Mhm.
Bob's got a flat tire. Do we care about Bob or do we care about getting the job done? And so different organizations can choose to rank those things differently. And they might say getting the job done is most important, and we're going to, tell Bob whatever it takes, he's got to get here, or those kinds of things. So that would be appropriate if the highest core value is we get the job done.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about the hierarchical core values, and I do think that this is so incredibly important, is it becomes this lens that we make decisions through. It also becomes a tremendous lens that we can have some of those conversations through that are sometimes harder conversations. That when we have an outline in front of us, like the core values, and we're aligned on language and we're aligned on the definition of what that means, we know the expectations, which cuts out half of the issues because we're clear on what's going to happen if X, Y, or Z happens.
Well, the other thing you can do with values that helps you to operationalize them is to not only have the noun, trust, but to have a verbal phrase that follows it. So one of our values is trust or trustworthiness. What that means is we tell the truth even if it makes us look bad. Safety might be a core value for a trades organization. What that means is we take an extra 2 seconds before we hit the on button or before whatever the case. So to put a verbal phrase after the noun really forces you when you're writing those to think about what do we want people to do because of this core value.
Mhm.
And that clarity really makes the values a decision-making tool or a behavioral driving tool.
Right, because we're really looking, as you just said, a behavioral driving tool. We're really interested in the behaviors because we can have great performers, but if their behaviors don't align with the core values and they're making it really difficult for the rest of the team, they're maybe not somebody we want to keep around for the long term. And so, how we have those conversations, and if I'm going to throw my HR hat on for a second and really start to look at, hey, if we're going through a disciplinary process or something like that, we have to be really, really clear and document the reason why, especially if performance is being hit. What are those other items that are not that would be grounds for that disciplinary action and or termination, knowing the impact that it's specifically having on the team?
Oh, for sure, yeah, and using the core values as a element of the reviews really makes that super clear to everybody, employees, the managers, the leaders of the organization. Tracy, you said something that I just want to run past you. Tell me how this strikes you. I think you said something like somebody who's a good performer, but there's other things, whatever. You hear that kind of thing a lot.
Right.
So here's the idea I want to try on you.
Sure.
My idea is that performance is the things we do, the words we say, and the way we say them. So
Mhm.
even tone, I actually think of that as performance in the workplace.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. What I will say is I don't think that that's the definition that we typically see in the workplace. Especially and you work a lot with trades organizations, there's a huge cultural shift that typically has to happen in order to start to address that tone where the tone has to be a part of the performance. And I
Mm.
don't think we're there yet for a lot of organizations. I'm curious for your experience on that.
I noticed that kind of thing. Well, they do the job, but they interact with others this way or
Yeah.
that way. And it seems that leaders have a hard time either reprimanding or holding accountable to things like the words they said. If it wasn't violent or something like that, it's disrespectful, but they don't quite know how to measure that as a performance. And so I think we can kind of get there, give the leaders some tools with clear core values around respectability, respect or teamwork, and then you fill out teamwork. And what this means is we respect and honor our colleagues.
Yeah. Yep. And that's exactly how we've built it in as well, is when you can have your core values as a metric inside your performance appraisals and as a metric inside of your hiring. Now you're tying everything together and now it does become a part of the performance because you've built it in and defined it as a part of the performance.
Good.
Absolutely. And I one of the things I know our listeners love is let's not just talk about theory, let's talk about some examples of where this actually came to life. So I'm curious, do you have any client examples of where this has really come to life for their organizations?
Well, I know you're going to have Greg on next week, and Greg runs a janitorial company in Western Michigan, maybe 500 employees or so, and has a real heart for his people. And one of their values is we care about our people. They may phrase it slightly differently, but he's really put meat on the bone there with an employee assistance fund with a meaningful contribution. He can talk about where the money came from if he wants to, but has put money behind we care about our people and has really done a great job of not just providing an 800 number, but real money that if Bob has a flat tire, Bob can get a new tire or a new set of tires or whatever the case might be. And they've done a great job of building out an organization that really seeks to care for their people. And we've seen great results in terms of their turnover rate is way below industry averages, and they're getting lots of referrals of employees come work with this company. It's a great place to work. So some of those he's got a big heart, but it's turning into great business results as
Yeah.
well. And that's super exciting when all that aligns.
Yeah, that and both of things. Amazing. So, as we start to wrap up today, I'm curious, John, what is a personal bucket list that you have for you and your family?
Oh, thank you for asking. We've done well, I mentioned Mount Rainier. And so that was in 2021 when we were on the RV trip across the country. We spent some time in the Pacific Northwest, and my wife and I have become rock climbers and mountain climbers. And so with my two oldest kids, we have plans to summit Mount Hood this year, which is an 11,200-foot volcano that's glaciated. It's snow on it all year round. And so that's been something we've been training for and planning the logistics and all that. And so that's sort of a big goal that we have together,
Incredible. What's a professional bucket list item that you're working towards?
a professional one. Well, I have a book that is going to be released at the end of 2025, and it's called Thinking for Success. And it's a series of 52 stories, and stories kind of open up this narrative engagement in our brains when we start to hear a story. And then I close each story with a kind of a moral of the story. And it's a tool. The book is a tool for leaders to use in staff meetings or at a stand-up meeting or something like this to help their people start to think better with their productivity, problem solving, the things that they believe and say about themselves and about their lives. And so the professional goal around this book, Thinking for Success, is that people will use it as a tool to improve the lives of the people around them. And that one staff meeting at a time, we can all get better.
Amazing. And as we talk about kind of people strategies and we use that core values today as a key people strategy, that really getting to know who your folks are personally and professionally. And I always like to say, so do you have some climbing examples inside of your book? Because when we can tie that personal professional together, it lets employees know we're interested in them as a whole and not just as what they produce. And so thank you so much for sharing both of those.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, with that, thank you for listening into this episode of the People Strategy Podcast. And join us next week as we dive into how some of this core values was put into practice and the impact of that on the organization. So, with that, have a great week. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening today. I'd love to connect with you. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at Tracy, Traci Austin, and at our website at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. If you'd love to learn more about our process, please reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for listening and sharing your feedback with us through a review. Have a fantastic day.